Chair of the BISG Board and Chief Strategy Officer at Get Abstract. On behalf of the rest of the board, I'd like to welcome you to the 2021 BISG Annual Meeting of Members. Normally, we hold this meeting in person, but I don't have to tell you that we left normal behind in about March of last year. And yet, as a whole, our industry has responded and adapted, navigating challenging waters with the same spirit of collaboration that has powered BISG for more than 45 years. Your continued support of BISG through membership and committee service helped us quickly adapt our programming and priorities to meet 2020 head-on. Before we begin the formal agenda today, I'd first like to acknowledge BISG's Executive Director, Brian O'Leary, for his exceptional efforts over the past 13 months, not only in pivoting BISG's operations, but as you'll see later today, also providing sound financial stewardship, positioning BISG to end this fiscal year on very solid ground. Thank you, Brian. I know that many of you here today already participate in BISG through committee work, by attending webinars, or even serving on the board. BISG is a membership organization, and the critical work it does is largely the result of generous volunteer efforts from people like you across the industry. If you or your organization aren't yet taking full advantage of everything BISG has to offer, which includes opportunities to influence standards and policy throughout the supply chain, please feel free to reach out directly to me or to Brian. We've got a full agenda today with some fantastic speakers, so it's time to get started. Though don't worry, there are some breaks along the way. To introduce our keynote speaker, I'd first like to welcome Jason Spanos of K&K Publishing. K&K is an enthusiastic supporter of BISG, including through sponsoring events like today's meeting, as well as through board service, and I thank them for that. Jason is K&K's Chief Revenue Officer and is responsible for new business development and sales in North America. He has implemented business systems across the US, Canada, Mexico, and Europe. Jason is also a PMP certified professional project manager, and he's up very early with us today as he's based near the Seattle area. Here to introduce our keynote speaker today, please welcome Jason Spanos.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning, everyone. As Andrew said, my name's Jason Spanos, and I'm part of the team at K&K Software. For those of you that know K&K, you probably think of us as a group that provides applications for publishers, such as royalties, title management, metadata management, customer engagement, and even cloud storage. What people don't usually think about is how those applications come about. Conventional books, they require paper, ink, binding, transportation, storage. While software requires computers, storage, again, a different kind, electricity, and in general, technology. The technology team that K&K is a part of is the Microsoft Network, also referred to as the Microsoft Ecosphere. Now, when you all think of a team, each of you that you belong to, most people hope for two things. Number one, they hope to be on the winning team. And number two, they also hope that their team is viewed as the good guys. Let's be honest, sometimes we wonder if occasionally we sacrifice the former for the latter, or the latter for the former, right? What is quite satisfying, though, is when you can look back and feel in your gut that you chose the team that was both. Being part of the K&K and the Microsoft team today gives me that sense of good in my gut. Now, what leads me to that good feeling? Here's some of the commitments that Microsoft has publicly documented and detailed regarding sustainability. By 2025, they will operate with 100% renewable energy and protect more land than they use. By 2030, they will become carbon negative, zero waste, and water positive. And by 2050, we're stretching far out, but listen to this, they will have removed all historical emissions that they have caused, meaning that their environmental goal is to remove all emissions created by the company since the birth of the company in 1975. How many companies can say that? Brad Smith, president of Microsoft, said that those of us who can afford to move faster and go further should do so. Now, we should not only look at our own immediate house, right, our own company, but the entire supply chain, our entire supply chain. How many companies do that? This is exciting. It's exciting to be part of that team and that culture. Now, some other time, I could fill an entire session discussing the commitments that Microsoft has made and what they've already achieved. But I want to draw your attention here today to what makes such a team possible. It's the individuals. We all know that there are certain individuals on such teams that are catalysts, they're advocates and leaders. These individuals can take smaller teams and unite them to forge larger teams, even coalitions, movements. Our keynote speaker today is Sherri Aldis, Chief of United Nations Publications. She is one of those people. At United Nations Publications, Sherri oversees the publishing activities and policies and supports the communication priorities and campaigns of the UN, such as the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Global Compact, and the SDG Publishers Compact. She has a passion for addressing global issues and also a passion for book selling, which makes her such a wonderful speaker for this crowd. And it is a rare individual that possesses passion, intelligence, and also the ability to communicate clearly at a global level. Everyone here today, please welcome Sherri Aldis.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason, for that very kind introduction. I'm very, very happy to be here with you this morning. It's an auspicious day for all of us, I think. It's, as you said earlier, it's the World Book and Copyright Day today. So happy World Book and Copyright Day to everybody. It was also Earth Day yesterday. So it's perfect timing. I'm not sure who picked the timing of the event today, but well done. It's very encouraging and inspiring that you've decided to focus on ensuring a sustainable future for the book business as the theme of your annual meeting this year. And I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to talk with so many of you about what I hope really is a shared goal, sustainable development. So I did start my career at the UN in 2015, which coincided with the start of the Sustainable Development Goals in the organization's 70th year. And they really have become the ever-present thread in our daily work at the UN, our main focus and our utmost priority. And that's even more the case today as we face one of our greatest challenges with the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, I'm sure that most of you know what the Sustainable Development Goals are. We also call them the SDGs or the Global Goals. According to a survey done in 2019 at Davos, 74% of adults globally are aware of them. But I'd still like to start with a short overview of the goals, including how they're impacted today by COVID-19. But my main purpose and hope today is to inspire and encourage you to participate actively in achieving the SDGs. The aspirations of the goals are, I think, very closely and naturally aligned with the values of the publishing industry across the supply chain. And our actions as an industry can have significant impact on success. So to start with, here is a brief overview of the goals and how they came to be. So what are the SDGs? I won't bore you with a comprehensive history of how they came about, but I would like to share a few key facts to provide some context. It all started with the quite revolutionary concept of the Millennium Development Goals, of course, which ended in 2015. This idea of global cooperation towards reducing poverty and inequalities was actually expanded with the SDGs. We needed a new agenda to guide us from 2015 to 2030 for all 193 UN member states. It needed to take into account the current state of the planet, where tackling climate change is essential for sustainable development and poverty eradication. And as you can imagine, the negotiations involving 193 UN member states, intergovernmental committees of international experts, and civil society was a major global consultation. We needed to determine what the goals should be and what to measure progress against. And getting all of those parties with differing points of view and priorities to agree to 17 goals with 169 indicators common to all was a true feat of diplomacy and a milestone success of multilateralism. There are many anecdotes, as you can imagine, about the process behind the scenes, and there are some great books on that I can recommend if you'd like to learn more. So here are the 17 goals to transform the world. A universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and improve the lives and prospects of everyone everywhere. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It means that we can, and we really have to, promote prosperity for all while protecting the planet. Ending poverty must go hand in hand with strategies that build economic growth and address a range of social needs such as education, health, social protection, and job opportunities, while tackling climate change and environmental protection. It's really about working together for an inclusive, sustainable, and resilient future for people and planet. These goals come with 169 targets, as I mentioned, that all have to be tracked. How do we figure out if we've made progress or not, with all of the hugely diverse range of actors contributing to them around the world? So we developed a framework. It's called the Global Indicator Framework for Sustainable Development Goals. And we also host an annual high-level political forum on sustainable development at the United Nations, which takes place in July every year. And this really is the global forum for providing political leadership, guidance, and recommendations on implementing the SDGs. It's where countries, the UN, other intergovernmental organizations, civil society, and businesses highlight the efforts that they are taking to achieve the SDGs, usually in person. Last year it wasn't. This year we'll see. And we look at what's working and what is not at a global, regional, national, and local level. And of course, this process is supported by books. We publish a lot of books on the SDGs at the United Nations. So my team, UN Publications, works to publish the UN's work. In order to share it, it needs to be reliable, verified, global, and primary source knowledge. Very important to us to share that with stakeholders, academics, and just curious members of the general public. So we publish the content online, we publish it in print, we publish it in the UN's 6 official languages and more whenever available. We publish it on UN platforms with our partners and in commercial channels. We promote it, like many of you probably do, with launch events on social media, using traditional and digital marketing, and also by relying on the many international media channels who follow the UN's work. And we work with actors across the supply chain to do all of this, from printers and distributors, technology companies, editorial services. We collaborate with many of you here today in one form or another. When I arrived in 2015, we started working to create the first aggregated platform for UN content, which had previously been dispersed online in as many places as there are departments and agencies. And bringing this huge body of work together in a consistent way really was a Herculean task, but we achieved it together. And the UN iLibrary, which you can see on the slide, has become a very important research tool and also a simple user-friendly gateway into this complex body of work that is produced by the UN. And now we're very proud, it even has a search facet that allows users to search the content by SDG. But today we can't talk about the SDGs or really anything at all without talking about the COVID-19 pandemic. It has caused us to lose ground in achieving some of the goals. It has laid bare, as nothing else really has, the deep inequalities that exist. We are seeing some light at the end of the tunnel at the moment with vaccines, herd immunity, and spring and summer on the way. And instead of being discouraged by the situation, as the Secretary General says, we need to look at the opportunity we now have to transform this moment into a turning point, giving new impetus to our efforts towards attaining our goals. One of our UN publications, the Emissions Gap Report, tells us that a low carbon pandemic recovery could cut up to 25% off the greenhouse emissions that are expected in 2030, putting the world much closer to the 2-degree pathway that's set out in the Paris Climate Agreement. And that is remarkably encouraging. We really can choose to leverage this crisis when our usual policies and social norms have been disrupted to shift to a more sustainable economy that works for both people and the planet. And luckily for us, we already know what we have to do. We have the roadmap. It's called the SDGs, and they are even more relevant now. So I'd like to share with you a few impacts of COVID on the SDGs. So COVID is not just a health crisis. It has a serious impact on progress towards achieving the goals over the next 10 years. We call this the decade of action. So for no poverty, we were already off track. And with COVID, an extra 71 million people have been pushed into poverty. On quality education, we have already made very slow progress, and school closures have exacerbated that, with 90% of all students globally out of school this past year. Gender equality remains unreached, and COVID lockdowns have tragically increased violence against women and girls, with an increase of domestic abuse in some countries by 30%. Now, SDG 13 on climate action is happily a slightly less gloomy story. The global community has shied away from commitments required to reverse the climate crisis, but COVID-19 has led to a 6% drop in greenhouse gas emissions. It's short of what we need, but better than what it has been. So this unprecedented situation really is having a long-term impact on the future of people and planet. But having these indicators and being able to track progress, or the lack of it, as we've seen in some cases, provides us with an impetus to do better. Living through the pandemic has shown us how important it really is to focus on sustainability. In September 2020, we officially entered the decade of action. We have 10 years left to achieve the ambitious goals that we have set for ourselves. And we've learned through COVID how we can act collectively towards a common goal when we need to. We've been protecting each other through mask wearing and social distancing. We've developed vaccines together and we've been sharing them through COVAX. We've all been helping our neighbors, our colleagues, our friends when they were sick or lost a loved one, and many more daily actions that we've all engaged in everywhere around the world. And we can use this same approach for other vital issues such as climate change and the other SDGs. We have the roadmap. Now is the time to implement it. It really is time for the decade of action. So what can we do? What can the publishing industry do? How can we contribute to ensuring we achieve the goals in the next 10 years? So even before the start of this decade of action, the publishing industry really has stepped up in so many ways to contribute to the SDGs. There seems to be a natural alignment between the values of the SDGs and those of the publishing industry. First of all, by publishing reliable, high-quality content in all subject areas, publishers already contribute directly to the SDGs, and in particular SDG 4 on quality education. Publishing as an activity in and of itself contributes to the goals directly through knowledge sharing, educating, and its positive impact on literacy, among many other ways. Increasingly, publishers are actually using the SDG framework to categorize their catalogs. This provides an easy way for booksellers and distributors to frame content in ways which will promote the SDG agenda. And there's also more and more attention given to issues related to diversity in the publishing industry. We've really seen over the past couple of years in particular, very public efforts to improve this area. And it's very encouraging and does contribute directly to SDG 5 on gender equality and SDG 10 on reduced inequalities. Publishers are also focusing more on producing content accessible to persons with disabilities, which contributes also directly to SDG 10 on reduced inequalities. More and more publishers are signing on to the Accessible Books Consortium Charter, which is supported by the UN agency WIPO, as well as IFLA and the IPA. And printers are using more certified paper, environmentally friendly inks across the supply chain, from shipping to pulping, traveling to photocopying. We're offsetting our carbon footprints. So what else can we do? Many of you are probably already adopting sustainable business practices and publishing content related to the SDGs, even without realizing it. And there are two main areas the publishing industry can make a real contribution to achieving SDGs. First of all, by publishing content on the SDGs and by communicating about them. And then secondly, by adopting sustainable business practices. So I'd like to take a closer look at each of these areas and some concrete steps that you can take. So first of all, publishing SDG content is a great way to raise awareness about the goals and the concepts behind them. Publishers are uniquely positioned to be catalysts of change. And if you're not a publisher, you can still communicate about the SDGs, what they are, and what you are doing to contribute to them on corporate websites, through social media, and in person to team members and partners. We can publish books on the SDGs for all target audiences, from children to academics, youth, and the general public to policymakers. We can commission new works on the themes represented by the goals or tag existing books with the relevant SDGs. Research that focuses on the concrete issues that need to be addressed through the SDGs serves as a tool for policymakers, and supports academia and civil society in making progress towards achieving them. Research also provides a scientific framework and a foundation for the goals. It helps combat misinformation, and the international collaboration that often goes into research helps us to move forward together more quickly while taking into account diverse viewpoints. Children's books is another great area to leverage the Sustainable Development Goals in educating and stimulating young people to care about the planet, people, and equality. Books with practical tips on how to live sustainably for all ages, from how-to books to cookbooks, even poetry, plays, and fiction on any of the vast array of topics covered by the SDGs, inspirational books of all sorts, photography of nature, people, the changing planet, and so many other topics that we can publish on. And if you do publish children's books, or you have children in your lives, you might be interested to learn about our SDG Book Club. So we created it in 2019 to raise awareness about the SDGs for children aged 6 to 12. It's done in partnership with the International Publishers Association, the International Federation of Library Associations, the International Board on Books for Young People, the European and International Booksellers Federation, and the Bologna Children's Book Fair. And every month or so, we work together to publish a list of recommended reading for one of the SDGs in all 6 official UN languages. We just announced the book list for SDG 13 on climate action that you might want to check out, especially if you have children in your life, and the URL is on the screen. So the second main area is adopting sustainable business practices, and many of you have probably already done this. There are some very obvious areas for the publishing industry to contribute, such as a sustainable supply chain, production, using FSC or recycled paper, or going digital, although there is some debate about that given the carbon footprint of data centers. According to some estimates, by 2030, electricity usage from ICT could actually contribute up to 23% of greenhouse gas emissions. That's more than the automotive and aviation industry combined, so some food for thought there. Reducing travel is another impactful contribution that can be made collectively by publishers, and we are all doing that today by participating remotely in this conference. Sustainable business practices can be implemented across the supply chain, and here are a few examples. So when we think about editorial, we can start planning an environmentally friendly book right from the start. If we think about the specs, the packaging, the quantities that we might need, consider perhaps digital formats, we are setting a path for ourselves to have a more sustainable process. In the pre-press process, we can question the number of proofs that we need. We can reduce the color printing and our ink and paper use. And we can think about using sustainable energy sources in the office. Heating and lighting, for example, are all very resource heavy. In the production phase, paper is obviously has a very heavy carbon footprint. It represents about 50 to 80% at least of publishers' carbon footprint. So we need to think about locally sourced papers, certified papers such as FSC. We need to question the inks and the materials we're using and use digital proofs whenever we can. Suppliers, here we can hold our suppliers, our paper suppliers, for example, accountable for their sustainable practices and evaluate the practices of the printer that we're using. So something to think about is if they use subcontractors, that can lead to additional transportation. So we need to look at the distance to the distributor and the paper supplier. And another important area here would be waste management. In terms of the quantities, we need to manage them carefully, not only for economic, but for environmental reasons, and think about using print on demand whenever possible to avoid waste. In the distribution phase, very heavy area here is shipping. So we can give some thought to grouping shipments, avoiding urgent shipments, really evaluating the means of transportation that we actually need, and holding shipping companies accountable for their own sustainable practices. Returns management, so we need to look at what we're doing in terms of our pulping practices and ensuring, for example, that it's done by companies who recycle. One way we can also manage returns is by monitoring the weight of the books that are sent out from distribution centers and how much weight is returned to them to give us an indicator. Packaging, we all know we need to reduce the use of single-use plastics, but also cardboard. And we need to minimize stock wherever possible. It does lead to waste and pulping, but also warehouses are heated and ventilated and cleaned, and all of that is very resource heavy. And then finally, in sales and marketing, the packaging and displays that we use, are they reusable? Can we have recyclable materials? And of course, the not using plastic bags in bookshops in particular is an important thing to implement. Questioning the number of review copies that we send out, and then also looking at the printed promotional materials such as catalogs and flyers that we produce. We can also look at what concrete efforts the publishing industry can take for each SDG. Many of them are also applicable to our personal lives and can be implemented on a corporate or organizational-wide basis. So no poverty and zero hunger, we can lead company-wide efforts to work on these areas locally or internationally through donations, volunteer work, and just giving staff time off to participate. Good health and well-being, we can encourage staff to be active and eat healthily and make sure that healthcare is provided to all staff. SDG 4 on quality education, as I've said before, the publishing industry naturally contributes to this SDG already, but we can also think about what learning opportunities and training and mentoring we can provide inside our companies. Gender equality, so having diversity and inclusion programs, and also objectives, so we have a way to track our progress. Clean water and sanitation, so looking at ways we can conserve water in our offices and provide access to clean, well-equipped sanitation and hand washing facilities, which obviously is even more relevant at the moment with the COVID-19 pandemic. Affordable and clean energy, some very obvious ones here that we also hopefully all do at home, turning off things when they're not needed, using renewable energy sources, ensuring the buildings we're working in are well insulated and efficient, turning down the thermostat and replacing light bulbs with LEDs. Decent work and economic growth, we need to look at reducing the gender pay gap. There's still work that needs to be done there in the publishing industry as everywhere else. Industry, innovation, and infrastructure. We need to invest in clean and resilient infrastructure to make sure that staff is safe and also to protect the environment. And we need to ensure that the companies engage with sustainable practices throughout the supply chain. SDG 10 on reduced inequalities, we can promote equal opportunities for persons with disabilities and eliminate discriminatory practices and adopt wage and social protection policies that reduce inequality. Sustainable cities and communities, we can shop locally and we can encourage staff, or we can ourselves bike or take public transportation. We can provide incentives and bike parking to facilitate this. Responsible consumption and production, reducing waste is an obvious area, and just having recycling bins that are conveniently located and responsibly disposed of. That's often the part that is harder to implement. And if possible, depending on where you are, think about having an office-wide compost bin. And again, this idea of accountability, asking partners in the supply chain what their sustainability practices are. So climate action, again, traveling less, banning single-use plastics in the office. We have a big sign in front of the UN that says that single-use plastics are not allowed in the building, for example. We can organize a no impact week, and we can also look at tracking and offsetting carbon footprints. Life below water, we can use sustainably sourced fish in the cafeteria or try to eat it if we go out. We can provide reusable water bottles to staff. And life on land, again, this is the issue of paper in particular for the publishing industry, and also the idea of diversifying plant-based food served in cafeterias, not just having wheat and corn, but having a more diversified choice. Peace, justice, and strong institutions. So this could be allowing staff time off to vote and participate in their civic duties. And in our personal and professional lives, speaking up whenever we see injustice, bullying, or violence. Partnerships for the goals. This is what we're doing today in a lot of ways, working together to achieve the goals. But we can also, within our professional environments, look at donation drives in the office, engaging in sustainable initiatives together, and then voicing collective support for sustainable practices and commitments, whether it be local or international agreements, such as the Paris Climate Agreement. So that sounds like a lot. And the next question might be, how do you start? How can you become involved? It seems like a lot to take on board, and they cover some really big challenges that society faces. But really the first step is to set a destination. It's the idea behind having the Sustainable Development Goals, to have a goal. And on a smaller level, it's about making a commitment. It's making a commitment that any organization can take to indicate how important sustainability is to an organization and their staff, how important it is to others, such as their customers and suppliers, and to the rest of the industry. And this is why we created at the United Nations with the International Publishers Association, the SDG Publishers Compact. We launched it at the Frankfurt Book Fair in 2020, and it features 10 concrete actions that all actors in the publishing industry can commit to help us accelerate progress. We already have nearly 100 signatories from across the publishing industry supply chain and around the world. And that doesn't even include, for example, the French Publishing Association, who recently joined us, who represents hundreds of French publishers that we hope will also commit individually. We have other publishing associations, such as the IPA, the Association of Learned and Professional Scholarly Publishers, the Publishers Association of New Zealand, the Börsenverein, which is the German Publishers Association, and many others. We have publishers ranging from academic and university presses, such as Bristol University Press. Children's book publishers like Kids Can Press are also members. We have large groups like Springer Nature and Elsevier, but also small publishers with a more targeted or mission-driven approach like Greystone Books from Canada or Stormberg Press from Australia. We have distributors, printers, and NGOs. And we have publishing entities from Ethiopia, from Pakistan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Brazil, Mexico, and of course the US and Canada. So I'd like to encourage you all to join us too in signing on to the 10 principles of sustainable publishing. They cover areas like sustainable business practices, inclusion and diversity, and publishing SDG content, which many of you are already doing. So the signatories to the SDG Publishers Compact commit to 10 actions that cover 3 core themes. The first is prioritizing sustainability. This is the idea of making a commitment, reporting on progress, and nominating someone within your organization who can be a central contact person. The second main theme is on raising awareness, promoting the SDGs within your organization, amongst suppliers, and in how you promote and acquire content. And the third main area is taking action, particularly important at the moment during the decade of action. We want signatories to see where they might collaborate locally or globally, to dedicate budget or resources towards their sustainability efforts, and finally to pick at least one SDG goal to focus on. However you contribute, it is welcome and it's important. I encourage you to choose at least one or some of the goals and make sure that you can achieve what you set out for yourself as an objective. We don't all have to commit to all of the goals in order to make progress. Joining us is free. That comes up sometimes. There's no cost to participate. And it's an extension of what many of you are already doing. It's meant to strengthen your commitment and bring broader awareness of the SDGs within publishing houses and across the supply chain. And we would be sincerely very happy to work more closely with all of you. And it really is for everyone, from publishing and library associations, booksellers, publishers, printers, paper suppliers, distributors, booksellers, librarians. We are really happy to work with each and every one of you because we have to do this together. We are encouraged and inspired by what you in the publishing industry have already done to support the SDGs, in spite of the recent challenges due to COVID-19, as well as the longer-term issues that we all face. We've learned during this difficult situation that we can work together to affect change and impact outcomes. So let's use that energy during the coming years to actually achieve our global goals. There's even a goal for that, SDG 17 on partnerships, so we can all work together to achieve them. I hope you will join us on this path. I know you'll be hearing much more in the next few hours about what is being done in the publishing industry and sharing ideas about other contributions that we can make together. I really look forward to working with you all in ensuring a sustainable future for the book business. So thank you for your attention and your commitment, and I will pass the floor back to Brian for the next session, which I'm looking forward to.
Thanks, Sherri. We had one question actually from the audience, Simone, who said that she loves the topic of the Sustainable Development Goals, and she's wondering if they could obtain a copy of this presentation material after the meeting.
Yes, very simple answer. Absolutely, with pleasure.
Great. So if you do that, we'll take care of that offline, and then from there, we can send it out to all the attendees so that they're able to have a record of it. We'll also be posting a copy of the recording that we're making for today, so that I think will be helpful.
Great.
So we're gonna take a minute to add